Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football. Welcome back to our pre-spring position previews. I know there's a lot of alliteration there, but breaking down the positions, and now we're on the defensive side of the ball. We'll talk about the D tackles, the interior D line specifically, and we'll start there. Before we do that, let me introduce the crew. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Favors. Pleased to be joined by fellow lifetime Longhorn, the young prodigy CJ Vogel, and another lifetime Longhorn, except he's got a national championship that he can brag about. Man, Marcus Myers joining us as well. All right, gentlemen, let's get right into it. Texas with now officially, I believe it is 10 D tackles they will have on the 2026 roster, or at least for now. I believe that most of that is done. Let's start with who do we believe are going to be the top four, and maybe even 5 or 6 guys in rotation. I'll give you the numbers. I went back and did it. So since Texas has, since Texas obviously has hired Sark in 2021, if you go look at it, you go look at the amount of D tackles with at least 100 plus snaps, with 5 of those in 2025, 4 in 24, 5 in 23, 6 in 22, and it was 5 in 2021. So to give you a little bit of perspective on it, how deep is that rotation going to be? Let's start there before we get into the specifics. How deep do we think that rotation is going to be this year? CJ, you first.
Yeah, I mean, I always think you need your 4, right? And then what can you get beyond that? If you can get to 6, that's fantastic. But we've seen it time and time again when Texas goes on the road to play in Alabama, a Michigan, or an Ohio State, they rotate about 4. Right. Yeah. Maybe a 5th guy gets a handful of snaps on that interior. But as the season progresses, we've seen it, and depth is obviously important in the trenches. You need to have up to 6 guys that you feel comfortable with at any point. Again, if you go and you play a team like a Michigan, and last year it was like a Kentucky or an A&M where, hey, maybe you want to play 3 interior guys to give more of a bare front. Hey, you need to be able to play and rotate too deep at the 3 defensive line spots. So anytime you can get up to 6, I think you feel really good. Obviously, returning hero Kanu is massive. Alex January, Murad Watson, Ian Drafart, that's probably the 4 you're working with. And then how big does a Justice Terry get? Mm-hmm. Can he figure in? What does Myron Charles and Josiah Sharma, how do they kind of go into year 2? You have a lot of really solid options at the moment. It is a very healthy room. But right now, how are those 4 to 6 going to separate themselves from the room? That's what I'm looking forward to in the spring.
Yep. What are your thoughts about it, Marcus?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with CJ. I think you have an anchor there in Hero Kanu, so you pretty much know what you're going to get there. Alex January really showed up pretty big down the stretch, and certainly him being able to stay healthy will factor in. And a guy like Murad Watson that ended up being banged up a decent bit was someone that you were really high on coming into the season after you had acquired him, former freshman All-American. And so I think he has the ability to take the next step. And then it's exactly what CJ said, a guy like Ian Drafart, I know, Rod, you have all the numbers on it. We've talked about it before that, he won't be asked to play as many snaps most likely as what he's played when he was at Arkansas. But, does that improve his efficiency, where you're using him less, but you really allow him to cut loose? And then, I've heard the same as you, CJ, when it comes to Charles and Sharma. They're really high on them. How well are they able to adapt? And, I mean, Justice Terry is going to find a place somewhere along this defensive line. I just have a tough time believing that young man, especially the way he played down the stretch, his ability to be disruptive. And then you have the young guys, even a guy like James Johnson. I don't think he's going to major in any kind of snaps, right? But another disruptive body that, could potentially get in there and make a little bit of noise. And then even Zion Williams was somebody that we're high on, coming out of high school. And then obviously the young man that they just acquired in Elijah Ali is likely someone that'll take a little bit more time to come along. But to your point, CJ, I think you kind of relatively, clearly feel good about at least 4 to 5 of the guys. And then you certainly would love to see, a 6th emerge that you can, truly count on throughout the season.
All right, let's start with, because I think you're right about the 4, and they feel good about that 4. Anything after that is added value. You could get freaky like you were in 2022 when essentially you had Ojimo, Coburn, Sweat, Broughton, Collins, and Murphy. You had
pretty good.
Wow. They all playing in the league.
Right.
But getting back to it, here I'm gonna give you Ian Drafart, little freaky stat. Let's talk about this young man for a little while. Well, I went back and looked at it. So I looked at Pro Football. They had him at 462 snaps at 389 pounds, whatever it was.
Yeah.
No D tackle playing at least 460 snaps last season weighed more than 350 pounds.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That is a freaky stat. Yeah.
That's a freaky dude, man. I don't know how a dude that big has that kind of, like cardiovascular training. Like that's really, so maybe, let's start with him and him obviously, and what he does is that 0-1 technique. He's elite at that. That's his expertise. He can play right over the ball in that A gap for you. Let's talk about what he's going to bring to the table for him. Marcus, you up first.
Yeah, what I think about immediately is how it frees up the linebackers. You have a guy like that that can eat up, 2, maybe sometimes even 3 blocks, right? I mean, that's a huge person right there that's clogging up the center of what an offense would want to do. And so my first thought is, that just gives you some really, really unique abilities for guys like a Rasheem Biles and a Ty Anthony Smith to be able to run and hit. It helps with their diagnosis. It keeps, offensive linemen, a lot from getting up to that second level on them. So I think it just allows Muschamp to be able to do any number of things. And he's a guy that can also be disruptive. I wouldn't be shocked to see him, make a few plays in the backfield from time to time. But when you see a guy like that lined up across you, you have to have a plan. And that plan has to be one where, your offensive line is, very much in sync to figure out how you're going to deal with a guy like that, because he's just a massive human being. And to your point, Rod, again, if he's able to, do that, have that type of production at that size that literally nobody else in the country with, similar snaps was able to do. Imagine if, you just, I don't know, took 50, 75 snaps off of that, depending on, the defense and what else you can get to show up in that room, he could be that much more effective. And you'll need that, again, 9-game SEC season. And, hopefully the season gets extended far beyond what Arkansas's was this year.
Yeah, Ian Drafart, over 324 snaps in the A gap in the last 2 years. CJ, Texas had 0 players with 100+ A gap snaps last season. At least you got a guy now that can do that for you. Bring it to the table.
No, absolutely. And that's going to be something that we see more of with Will Muschamp in my eyes, as Texas kind of evolves that defensive front 7 a little bit more. Obviously, getting someone over the A gap is very important. And we saw that with Muschamp's approach, right? Not only did he go add 380-pound, 89-pound Ian Drafart, and by the way, for him to be listed as that at Arkansas, Texas right. Fibbed a little bit with T'Vondre Sweat. They said, 355, 360. He was pushing that same range. Yeah. So to be listed at that, could he be even bigger? I don't know. But point is, they went out and they added Zion Williams, another 350-pound guy. You already have Josiah Sharma, who's north of 345. You have plenty of beef to play that A gap, zero tech head up on a center, which is something that I think we're going to see more and more of with Will Muschamp, something that maybe you didn't get straight up, if you would, under PK.
Yep, that's a good point. Let's move on to Hero Kanu and talk about him a little bit. I think, if you talk about biggest surprises last season, to me, Hero Kanu's got to be at the top of the list. Now, I know Ryan Nibbler's probably the highest guy on that list, but think about it. Came in and immediately was able to contribute. From the jump, had already won the spot at D tackle for Texas in the offseason and played more snaps, I believe, than any D tackle in that Ohio State game. He ended up leading you in pressures at the D tackle spot with 20. He had 21 stops. Hero Kanu might benefit the most from the presence of bringing in a guy like Ian Drafart and now the depth now in this D tackle room. What are your thoughts about Hero Kanu, CJ?
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it, Rod. He had 130 more snaps than any other defensive lineman on the team a year ago. That's a lot of snaps. That's almost 2 full games worth of snaps. Mm-hmm. And to your point, it kind of surprised folks, especially early in the year. You start looking through the snap counts of games. You say, hey, man, I don't know if this is the guy I expected to be leading this group or this front 7 in snaps. Yeah. But as we came very, soon to find out, he deserved it and became a leader in that room. And obviously the play backed it up. He was fantastic in run defense. He was able to lead your defensive linemen in interior pressures as well. So coming back and beyond anything else, being a vocal piece, I know, for interior defensive linemen, it may not be a super important part of your game to, be a vocal leader, but in practice it is, in the weight room it is, in film training it is, right? And so that is something that I look at with Hero Kanu and say, all right, beyond anything else, it is a veteran leader who obviously the play backs up, and I believe he'll be going into his 5th year sign me up for all the 4th, 5th, 6th-year guys you can on the trenches. That's how you win games.
And I apologize. I know it's Kanu. My bad. Because I know, I think it's Khan. So I apologize. The man deserves me to say his name correctly. It's Kanu. Marcus, I think he's going to actually, people forget, this young man has not been playing football that long, American football.
Right.
And so I think his upside now I think it's even higher. And I think you go look at his rate of development, considering he is still actually learning the game, but playing it at a high level. I think he could be a breakout guy for you this year, potentially, especially considering the recent history of D tackles here at the University of Texas.
Yeah. And when you think about it too, Rod, it's like, this is a guy that had an NFL decision to make. Like he was genuinely considering going to the league. So to be able to retain him, to get that experience back in the room, it's huge. I think back to when he was first acquired from the portal. And you got to remember, like, that was off of an Ohio State team that had a bunch of older guys come back. And, I always try to kind of get a sense for what fan bases think of their guys that are leaving out. And there weren't any disparaging comments about Kanu, but it also wasn't one of those things where they felt it was necessarily a huge loss. And so, to CJ's point, I know our man Jeff Howe has said this a number of times, but who would have thought, at the time that he was acquired, he would end up being what he's become. And I mean, he's a guy that's disruptive. He's reliable, is in there in pretty much every game. I don't think he missed any. And it was just somebody that was a stalwart in that defensive, tackle room. And so, again, I think that's huge when you have, some younger guys still kind of working through it, but also, some maturity in the room as well with some guys that already have some snaps underneath them. So I think getting him back into that room and, kind of leading the way, not only from his on-field performance, but from a leadership standpoint, his experience will be great, for this room for the 2026 season.
Just want to read this really quickly before we move on and get to a couple other guys. Moved to California in October of 2020, played organized football for the first time in the spring of 2021. Don't forget that. Organized football for the first time in 2021. And look at where he is now. Just throwing it out there, man. Upside's tremendous. Speaking of another freaky athlete with this group, CJ, is Alex January.
Yeah.
I mean, people forget what kind of freaky athlete this guy was, and this is a potential breakout campaign for him as well in 2026.
Yeah, I think so. And look, again, he was another guy that Texas relied heavily on to provide big-time snaps for you, right? I think he played around 350 last year over, again, 13 games. So he was someone that Texas relied on. He was out for 2 or 3 games early in the year, if I remember correctly. But anyways, he was your second or third leading snap getter on the interior. And coming into the season, there were high expectations, right? You don't see the field as a true freshman in the SEC unless people obviously believe that you have a high ceiling. And I believe that there's going to be another NFL decision for Alex January after this year, right? It's one of those things that the minute you get those expectations, how do you perform to them? Well, I have no reason to think that Kenny Baker is going to be a guy that kind of molds him into being a total plus for the Longhorns alongside the rest of those guys on the interior.
Yep.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think of too, CJ, is, people forget, like, this is a guy that played alongside Colin Simmons in high school.
Yep.
And if I'm not mistaken, he was either like district or defensive MVP or something.
He was
on the same line with Colin Simmons. So, like, this is a special guy. He has lineage and legacy behind him and his father. So, like, it's a guy that knows how to play the game. And once he was able to get healthy, made a huge impact for the defense down the stretch. And so I'm with you. I think, the sky's the limit for his potential as well. And is someone that, if everything goes well, will be making a decision, whether or not he's going to, keep playing some college ball or take his talents to the next level.
Yep. And, this group, in time that top 4 you were talking about, Murad Watson's, I think, going to round out that top 4 guys, bring experience. He was second on the team among D tackles last year in pressures, I believe. He was not actually in second. That was Cole Brevard. But this is a guy that last year it was expected to provide a lot more snaps for you, but didn't. I think still having that experience though at the D tackle position is going to be key for you. Which one of these younger guys, and I think Justice Terry is probably the easy answer, among Justice Terry, Myron Charles, Josiah Sharma, do you guys expect to contribute the most or be able to give you added value with that rotation of 4 guys?
This is kind of the big question. Who steps up? Is it Charles? Is it Sharma? Is it Zion Williams? Right? there's a lot of competition for that, I would say second team amongst those guys, that second group. To me, it's how often does Texas deploy that true nose? Because if you don't see a true nose that often, well, we know at the top of that pecking order, it's going to be Ian Drafart. If it's not, well, and you don't see Drafart on the field, well, that means you're 2 spots removed if you're Josiah Sharma, in a sense. So that's a big question for me, is how often does Texas deploy that head-up nose over the center? And if so, look, I think Texas loves Josiah Sharma. I've heard a lot of positives this year. He's really kind of grown into his own, not just body, but role, or what they perceive to be his role at Texas. So I'm really interested in him. That's kind of my pick and who I'll be watching a lot of this spring.
Good. I like that. What about you, Marcus?
Yeah, I think kind of to your point, Rod, like Justice Terry is a different body type than the other guys that CJ just, kind of named. And so I am interested to see how they go about some of that deployment, what type of packages Muschamp puts together in, some true like goal line and short yardage settings, right? That would be an opportunity for some of those guys to be able to get on the field. If you're not as worried about, someone necessarily beating you with their arm, or you are kind of projecting it to be a true, kind of straight up run, trying to grind it out kind of thing. You might see some of those bigger guys on the field. For me, I still kind of expect, Justice Terry to make some type of leap. It would just be hard for me to imagine him not, doing that under Will Muschamp defense. And so, I'm kind of with CJ in that, I want to keep an eye on those bigger fellows, but Justice Terry would still be the person that, I really want to see break out. I think if that's possible, if he's able to, really kind of ascend still as he was towards the end of the season, I think that would do wonders for your defense.
Yeah, the safe answer obviously is Justice Terry, because he's definitely going to be used. You just don't know, like you said, in what manner he'll be weaponized. But I think you'll get to 5. You could even get to 6 D tackles this year where they have at least 100 snaps. And that's, you got to go all the way back to 2022 when you were as deep as you ever were at D tackle at Texas, when you had essentially 3 duos that you trusted to rotate out there. Depending on, like CJ said, how much you use that zero, that true nose, that 0, that 1 technique, maybe Texas actually does deploy, end up 6 D tackles in that rotation if they like Sharma and they like Justice Terry. We know they'll like their top 4 in Hero Kanu, Alex January, Ian Drafart, and Murad Watson. All right, good stuff, guys. Appreciate the expertise. Great breakdown. Thank you, each and every one of you out there, for watching and for listening. And for CJ and for Marcus, I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Until next time, look at Horns.